Yakumo was an armored cruiser built for the Imperial Japanese Navy in the late 1890s. As Japan lacked the industrial capacity to build such warships herself, the ship was built in Germany. She participated in most of the naval battles of the Russo-Japanese War of 1904–05, and was lightly damaged during the Battle of the Yellow Sea and the Battle of Tsushima. Yakumo saw no combat during World War I and began the first of many training cruisers in 1917, although she was not officially reclassified as a training ship until 1931. Her last training cruise was in 1939, but the ship continued to conduct training in home waters throughout the Pacific War. Yakumo became a repatriation transport after the war and was broken up in 1946–47. Background and design. The 1896 naval expansion plan was made after the First Sino-Japanese War, and included 4 armored cruisers in addition to 4 more battleships, all of which had to be ordered from overseas shipyards as Japan lacked the capability to build them itself. Further consideration of the Russian building program caused the IJN to believe that the battleships ordered under the original plan would not be sufficient to counter the Imperial Russian Navy. Budgetary limitations prevented ordering more battleships, and the IJN decided to expand the number of more affordable armored cruisers to be ordered from 4 to 6 ships, believing that the recent introduction of tougher crop cemented armor would allow them to stand in the line of battle. The revised plan is commonly known as the 6-6 Fleet. The first 4 ships were built by Armstrong Whitworth in the United Kingdom, but the last 2 ships were built in Germany and France. To ensure ammunition compatibility, the IJN required the builders to use the same British guns as the other 4 ships. In general, the IJN provided only a sketch design and specifications that each builder had to comply with, otherwise each builder was free to build the ships as they saw fit. Unlike most of the contemporaries which were designed for commerce raiding to defend colonies and trade routes, Yakumo and her half-sisters were intended as fleet scouts and to be employed in the battle line. Description: the ship was 132.3 meters long overall and 124.64 meters between perpendiculars. She had a beam of 19.57 meters and had an average draft of 7.21 meters. Yakumo displaced 9,646 metric tons at normal load and 10,288 metric tons at deep load. The ship had a metacentric height of 0.95 meters. She had a double bottom and her hull was subdivided into 247 watertight compartments. Her crew consisted of 670 officers and enlisted men. Yakumo had 2 4-cylinder triple-expansion steam engines, each driving a single propeller shaft. Steam for the engines was provided by 24 Belleville boilers, and the engines were rated at a total of 15,500 indicated horsepower. The ship had a designed speed of 20 knots and reached 21.005 knots during her sea trials from 16,960 IHP. She carried up to 1,300 metric tons of coal and could steam for 7,000 nautical miles at a speed of 10 knots. Armament. The main armament for all of the 6-6 Fleet armored cruisers was 4 Armstrong Whitworth built 45 caliber 8-inch guns in twin-gun turrets, 4 in aft of the superstructure. The electrically operated turrets were capable of 130 degrees rotation left and right, and the guns could be elevated to plus 30 degrees and depressed to minus 5 degrees. The turret accommodated 65 shells, but could only be reloaded through doors in the turret floor and the ship's deck that allowed the electric winch in the turret to hoist shells up. for the shell room deep in the hull. The ship carried a total of 328-inch shells. The guns were manually loaded and had a rate of fire about 1.2 rounds per minute. The 203mm gun fired 113.5-kilogram armor-piercing projectiles at a muzzle velocity of 760 meters per second to a range of 18,000 meters. The secondary armament consisted of a dozen Ellsworth Ordnance Company Pattern Z quick-firing 40-caliber 6-inch guns. Only 4 of these guns were not mounted in armored casemates on the main and upper decks, and the mounts on the upper deck were protected by gun shields. The 45.4 kilograms AP shells were fired at a muzzle velocity of 700 meters per second. The guns were provided with 150 rounds each. Yakumo was also equipped with a dozen 40-caliber QF 12-pounder 12 CWT guns and 8 QF 2.5-POUNDER Yamauchi guns as close-range defense against torpedo boats. The former gun fired 76mm 5.7-kilogram projectiles at a muzzle velocity of 719 meters per second. Yakumo was equipped with 5 457mm torpedo tubes, 1 above water in the bow and 4 submerged tubes, 2 on each broadside. The Type 30 torpedo had a 100-kilogram warhead and 3 range speed settings: 800 meters at 27 knots, 1000 meters at 23.6 knots or 3000 meters at 14.2 knots. Armor: all of the 6.6 Fleet armored cruisers used the same armor scheme with some minor differences, one of which was that the 4 later ships all used crop-cemented armor. The waterline belt ran the full length of the ship and its thickness varied from 178mm amidships to 89mm at the bow and stern. It had a height of 2.13 meters, of which 1.49 meters was normally underwater. The upper strake of belt armor was 127mm thick and extended from the upper edge of the waterline belt to the main deck. It extended 61.49 meters from the forward to the rear barbette. Yakumo had only a single transverse 127mm armored bulkhead that closed off the forward end of the central armored citadel. The barbettes, gun turrets and the front of the casemates were all 152mm thick, while the sides and rear of the casemates were protected by 51mm of armor. The deck was 63mm thick and the armor protecting the conning tower was 356mm in thickness. Construction and career. Yakumo, named from a stanza of the Waka poem by Susanoo in the Japanese mythology, was ordered on the 1st of September 1897 and laid down a year later by Eggvulkanstettin in Stettin, Germany. The ship was launched on the 8th of July 1899 and completed on the 20th of June 1900. She departed Stettin 2 days later and arrived in Yokosuka, Japan, on the 30th of August. Russo-Japanese War. At the start of the Russo-Japanese War, Yakumo was assigned to the 2nd Division of the 2nd Fleet. She participated in the Battle of Port Arthur on the 9th of February 1904, when Vice Admiral Togo Hashiro led the combined fleet in an attack on the Russian ships of the Pacific Squadron anchored just outside Port Arthur. Togo had expected the surprise night attack by his destroyers to be much more successful than it was, anticipating that the Russians would be badly disorganized and weakened, but they had recovered from the surprise and were ready for his attack. The Japanese ships were spotted by the protected cruiser Boyarin, which was patrolling offshore, and alerted the Russians. Togo chose to attack the Russian coastal defenses with his main armament and engage the ships with his secondary guns. Splitting his fire proved to be a poor decision, as the Japanese 8- and 6-inch guns inflicted little damage on the Russian ships, which concentrated all the fire on the Japanese ships with some effect. Although many ships on both sides were hit, Russian casualties numbered some 150, while the Japanese suffered roughly 90 killed and wounded before Togo disengaged. Yakumo was not hit during the engagement, although she did hit the protected cruiser Novik one time with an 8-inch shell. In early March, Vice Admiral Kamimura Hikonojo was tasked to take the reinforced 2nd Division north and make a diversion off Vladivostok. While scouting for Russian ships in the area, the Japanese cruisers bombarded the harbor and defenses of Vladivostok on the 6th of March to little effect. Upon the return to Japan a few days later, the 2nd Division was ordered to escort the transports ferrying the Imperial Guards Division to Korea and then to join the ships blockading Port Arthur. Yakumo was then transferred to Rear Admiral Dewa Shigeto's 3rd Division. On the 23rd of June, the ship was due as flagship when the Pacific Squadron sortied in an abortive attempt to reach Vladivostok. But the new squadron commander, Rear Admiral Wilhelm Vicheft, ordered the squadron to return to Port Arthur when it encountered the Japanese battle line shortly before sunset, as he did not wish to engage his numerically superior opponents in a night battle. Battle of the Yellow Sea. On the morning of the 10th of August 1904, Dewa's cruisers were over 15 nautical miles south of Togo's 1st Division when the Russians sortied from Port Arthur in another attempt to reach Vladivostok. In the early stages of the battle, Dewa attempted to engage the Russian cruisers trailing the battleships in accordance with Togo's standing orders, but was rebuffed by fire from the battleships. As Dewa closed with the Russians later in the afternoon in another attempt to attack the Russian cruisers, a 12-inch shell struck Yakumo amidships at 1540, killing 12 and wounding 11. The range at this time exceeded 8 nautical miles, beyond the range of any gun in his squadron, so Dewa ordered his ships to disengage. By 1745, Yakumo had maneuvered to about 8,000 to 9,000 meters from the damaged Russian battleship Poltava and opened fire. Yakumo continued to close until the Russian squadron was thrown into confusion by the death of Vicheft around 1840. The 3rd Division then followed Togo's ships as they circled the Russian ships while they sorted themselves out, now firing at the Russian cruisers with little effect, until Togo ordered Dewa to attack the Russian destroyers at about 1944. Dewa cancelled that last order and turned south around 2000 in pursuit of several Russian cruisers that were fleeing to the south, in an attempt to intercept them before they reached the isolated flotillas of destroyers and torpedo boats. The Russian ships were engaged by other Japanese cruisers before they could reach the small ships, and Dewa broke off the pursuit around 2025 as light was fading. He continued southeastwards overnight and spotted 1 cruiser and 2 destroyers but was unable to catch any of them. On the 14th of August, Yakumo and the 3rd Division was ordered to Tsingtao to confirm that the Germans had indeed interned the battleship Zazarevich and 3 destroyers that had taken shelter there after the battle. After the return, they were reassigned to the blockade of Port Arthur. In mid-September, Yakumo was transferred back to Kamimura's 2nd Division, which was defending the Strait of Tsushima, although she began a refit at the end of the month. The ship returned to Dewa on the 15th of November and he transferred his flag back to her. On the 13th of December, the ship attempted to rescue survivors of the Takasago after she had struck a mine, but found no one still living. Yakumo was sent to Sasebo Naval Arsenal for another refit 5 days later. On the 1st of February 1905, the ship was ordered to join Rear Admiral Shimamura Heiro's 2nd Division blockading Vladivostok, although this only lasted for a few weeks as she was ordered to Kure Naval Arsenal for a final refit in mid-February before the anticipated battle with the Russian ships sent from the Baltic Fleet. Battle of Tsushima. As the Russian 2nd and 3rd Pacific Squadrons approached Japan on the 27th of May, having sailed from the Baltic Sea, Yakumo was assigned to Kamimura's 2nd Division of the 2nd Fleet. The Russians were spotted by patrolling Japanese ships early that morning, but visibility was limited and radio reception poor. The preliminary reports were enough to cause Togo to order his ships to put to sea, and the 2nd Division spotted the Russian ships under the command of Vice Admiral Zinovy Rozhestvinsky at around 11:30. Kamimura closed to about a range of 8,000 meters before sheering off under fire to join Togo's battleships. Yakumo was 4th of 6 when Togo opened fire on the 2nd Pacific Squadron at 14:10 and, like most of the ships in the division, engaged the battleship Oslobya, which was forced to fall out of formation at 14:50 and sank 20 minutes later. By this time the Russian formation was in disorder and the battleship Nyasuvorov suddenly appeared out of the mist at 15:35 at a range of about 2,000 meters. All of Kamimura's ships engaged her for 5 minutes or so, with Yakumo and the armored cruiser Azuma also firing torpedoes at the Russian ship without effect. After 17:30, Kamimura led his division in a fruitless pursuit of some of the Russian cruisers, leaving Togo's battleships to their own devices. He abandoned his chase around 18:03 and turned northwards to rejoin Togo. His ships spotted the rear of the Russian battle line around 18:30 and opened fire when the range closed to 8,000–9,000 meters. Nothing is known of any effect on the Russians, and they ceased fire by 19:30 and rejoined Togo at 20:08 as night was falling. The surviving Russian ships were spotted the next morning and the Japanese ships opened fire around 10:30, staying beyond the range at which the Russian ships could effectively reply. Rear Admiral Nikolai Nebogotov therefore decided to surrender his ships, as he could neither return fire nor close the range. In the meantime, the coast defense ship Admiral Ushakov had fallen well behind Nebogotov's ships and was spotted by the protected cruiser Chiyoda early in the morning. But the Japanese were more intent on locating the main body of the Russian fleet than attacking a single isolated ship. Admiral Ushakov was then spotted at 14:10, well after Nebogotov's surrender, by Shimamura, who received permission to pursue her with his flagship, the armored cruiser Iwate and Yakumo. They caught up with the Russian ship at 1700 and demanded her surrender. Admiral Ushakov attempted to close the range to bring the Japanese cruisers within range of her guns, but they were fast enough to keep the range open and the Russian ship never hit either one. After about half an hour, Admiral Ushakov was listing heavily enough that her guns could not elevate enough to bear, and her commander ordered his crew to abandon ship and the scutting charges detonated. The ship sank in 3 minutes and 12 officers and 327 crewmen were rescued by the Japanese. Between them, Yakumo and Iwate fired 89.8 and 278 6-inch shells during the engagement. Over the course of the entire battle, Yakumo was struck by a single 12-inch shell and 6 others, of which 3 or 4 were 6 inches in size. They inflicted only minor damage. On the 14th of June, Yakumo was assigned as the flagship of Vice Admiral Kataoka Shichiro, commander of the Third Fleet, as part of the operation to capture the island of Sakhalin in July. World War I. In November 1914, Yakumo was deployed to Singapore preparatory to searching for the German commerce raider Emden, but the ship was sunk before the mission began. Yakumo served as the flagship of Destroyer Squadron 2 from the 13th of December 1915 to the 1st of December 1916, and then of Suarez in Taiwan from 1 to the 12th of December. In February 1917, the ship began patrolling the South Pacific and Indian Oceans, searching for German commerce raiders. She began the first of her many training cruises on the 5th of April when she departed for North America and Hawaii, before arriving back in Japan on the 17th of August. In October 1918, Kichi Saburo Nomura was appointed captain of Yakumo for 2 months, only one of which he spent on board the vessel, as a political appointment to qualify Nomura for flag rank. Intra-war years. On the 1st of September 1921, Yakumo was redesignated as a first-class coast defense ship and used primarily for training duties in long-distance oceanic navigation and officer training for cadets in the Imperial Japanese Navy Academy. In this capacity, she participated in 13 more voyages in the 1920s and 1930s to Europe, North and South America, and the South Pacific, including a circumnavigation of the globe from August 1921 to April 1922, in company with the armored cruiser Izumo. 2 of the naval cadets that participated in this cruise were Princes Kuniasa Akira and Kacho Hirotada. In 1924, 4 of Yakumo's 12-pounder guns were removed, as were all of her QF2.5-POUNDER guns, and a single 8 cm 43rd-year type anti-aircraft gun was added. In addition, 3 of her torpedo tubes were removed. 3 years later, her boilers were replaced by 6 Yarrow boilers, formerly from the battleship Haruna, which reduced her power to 7,000 IHP and maximum speed to 16 knots. These boilers used a mix of coal and fuel oil, and the ship now carried a total of 1,210 metric tons of coal and 306 metric tons of oil. During a visit to Tsingtao in 1930, Yakumo and Izumo had to land Marines on the 13th of January to quell a riot by Japanese residents there. The following year, the ship was reclassified as a training ship. On the 6th of November 1936, between the islands of Saipan and Truk, an accidental explosion in her front magazine killed 4 crewmen and flooded her front food locker. Repairs were made underway and Yakumo arrived home 2 weeks later, a month after her return. In December 1936, Captain Matomu Ugaki assumed command of Yakumo until he took command of the battleship Hyuga the next year. Her last training cruise ended on the 20th of November 1939. World War II. After the start of the Pacific War, Yakumo was reclassified as a first-class cruiser on the 1st of July 1942, and her 8-inch guns were replaced by 4 12.7 cm Type 89 dual-purpose guns in 2 twin mounts. In addition, her light anti-aircraft armament was augmented. However, Yakumo remained within the confines of the Seto Inland Sea throughout the war, as she was assigned to training duties, and was not used in any combat operations. She was stricken from the Navy list on the 1st of October 1945. Yakumo began service as a repatriation transport on the 7th of December. Her mission was to return troops and civilians to the home islands from Japan's former overseas possessions, primarily from Taiwan and mainland China. She completed her last voyage in June 1946, repatriating a total of 9,010 people. Yakumo arrived at the Maizuru shipyard of Hitachi Shipbuilding and AMP Engineering on 20 July 1946 to begin demolition that lasted until 1 April 1947.